Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. I'm Mahin and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Mort and Sim. Today's show, we have got a very special guest, someone that we've been excited to bring on for a long time. We're finally making it happen, and this is none other than Imam Marc Manley. For those of y'all who don't know, Imam Marc is a native of the Detroit, Michigan area, became Muslim in 1992, is a former chaplain at both the University of Pennsylvania and Drexel University, and is currently the Religious Director at the Middle Ground Muslim Center. And he's a Renaissance man in some ways, well-rounded, pro-Second Amendment guy, actually a member of the NRA, and is also a pretty sharp dresser. Like, he's got a sartorialism down, and, you know, now what he's working on right now seems like, you know, as a guy in his mid-40s, like, help teaching us younger cats that we gotta, like, get in shape again. You got that shakes and squats hashtag on lock right now. So, Imam Marc, first of all, appreciate you coming on. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for inviting me on. I've been an avid listener. I've been just gobbling up all of the past episodes. I'm really enjoying them.
Thank you so much. I've been telling the guys about you for a while, and I've said, you know, this is someone who is not a cookie cutter Muslim, especially some of the more well-known converts and public personalities that we see. Imam Marc is someone who is really unique and is very opinionated as well, and he's gonna give us an honest discussion. And one of the reasons why we have we have a preference towards these honest discussions is that we found that people who are in the celebrity status world, they're very careful about what they say, and you're somebody who definitely
just keeps it real, or keep it at 100 to some of your podcast episodes.
I used to listen to the shows you used to do with Jerry Hionis.
Oh yeah, my man Jerry, back in the day.
Yeah, he was a previous guest of ours.
He was like, when we were like babies back then, we had Jerry on, back when Brexit went down. And I don't know if he ever told you this. It was funny because, like, we were Brexit happened, and, you know, on our show we try to stay relevant about contemporary affairs, and we saw that he was tagged by Joe Bradford as an expert on world global economics. And I didn't know who he was. I just Googled, I just checked his Facebook profile, and he looked like a cool dude. And, and that's the kind of guest we like, man. No frills, just like, you know, straight up. And then Sim and Jerry have this, like, shared passion for, like, death metal or something.
Yeah, heavy metal music. So.
That's him. That's him.
You know, for sure.
We have a lot of conversations on Facebook.
So, I want to say that the first time people really started hearing about you, and we'll start this off with a bang here, is your situation previous to your current role, where you were an imam at a masjid for like 9 months. I believe you had moved across the country for this gig. Am I not right?
That is correct.
Like, you know, and this took you out to California, and then I think Imam Suhaib brought this like to our attention. A lot of the stuff about like how masjid boards are abusing imams and whatnot came to light there. Stuff that we've always kind of known about, stuff that like I personally, in some ways deal with, in a sense that like I've got friends who are both like imams, but also masjid board members. But I try to think that I'm more favorable towards the imams, so to speak. Like I always tell my imam friends, like, you guys need to make sure you get paid, because like there is no waqf here, right? It ain't like the good old days back under like an Islamic State or something where you're gonna get hooked up. These guys will like starve you to death if they can, under the guise of fi sabilillah.
I like to refer to it as waqf de fiqh. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you better watch out, man. I highly recommend economic independence for anybody remotely considering this career, because as you said, not only did I move across the country for this gig, I cashed in my 401k from my previous job. You know, I worked as a chaplain, but my main gig at Penn was actually in the IT department. So I spent 8 or 9 years working at UPenn, and I basically not basically, I did. I cashed in my 401k in order to be able to take this job out here.
So back to your mindset, when you're out there in the East Coast of Philadelphia and then you were approached to be an imam, like, what was the thought process that made you make that decision?
Oh man, it's a little bit complicated. I'll try to summarize. I mean, part of it was, my foray just into being a thought leader in the community is something that had grown organically over several years. Even back to when I was living in Michigan, I learned Arabic early on. So, I had taught Arabic and a few things and just, always wanted to participate in the community. But by the time I had arrived in Philadelphia, there was just, I think it was a certain change of life and other things going on that I was considering a career move. I had worked at that point. I had probably been working in IT for a good 10 years or so, and I hated it. I really didn't like IT, but what else was I going to do as a approaching 40-year-old ambiguous black man with a high school diploma? Like, what else was I going to do to make some money?
What part of IT were you in infrastructure or like database stuff?
Like web development.
Okay.
I mean, I was like a jack of all trades in my department. So it was like front end web development along with like, user support and, but I hated computers, but I was able to do it. And still to a certain degree, nobody cares if you have a degree in IT. It's more like, do you have the skill set? Can you get the job done?
Right.
But it just began to weigh upon me. Like, man, I'm really sick and tired of sitting in front of this freaking computer screen. And, my real passion was being an egghead, a nerd. I mean, I've been mentored by Dr. Jackson for like 20 plus years. And I think what I really wanted to do was to go to school, become some sort of professor and write books and do research or something, right? So, this whole Muslim Chaplain thing developed, and through that, my name began to get circulated because the MSA at Penn began to record my the khutbahs, right? And once, it kind of like started floating out there in the internet, people started coming across my khutbahs, and then I started getting invites to this or that little conference or whatnot. I remember one year, Imam Suhaib invited me to Boston while he was still there. And I think that's also when I kind of showed up out of nowhere. And people sort of, some people took a liking, I guess, to my perspectives on things. So the ball began to roll, more gradually downhill from there in that direction. But to be quite honest, like I did try to further my IT career, but every move I tried to make basically was blocked. I mean, I had a very antagonistic relationship with my boss who I don't think she cared much for Muslims or for black people. Mm-hmm. So my moves that I tried to make in my IT career were very much thwarted by this person. So part of it was also like, well, my IT career is going nowhere. This imam thing seems to be opening up, even though I was very, very reluctant. Just to be honest, because everybody I knew that was an imam was like, don't do it. Like it's a crazy move. And of course,
that's what I told Sheikh Amir, our podcast host over here, when he came back from Egypt after studying. I told him get a secular education and don't even work with the Muslim community. But he's a good man. He said, I don't care about the mistreatment that they give him, and he deals with whatever issues that come along with working with the Muslim community.
I think the biggest problem, though. Oh, sorry. I think the biggest problem, though, with imams is that there's a lot of community politics. Like, they come in with the intention to do good things, and then they don't realize what's happening in the back end at the masjids, the board, in the community. The
board is usually the most difficult.
Exactly. And then it's not even about a lot of these guys are ready to sacrifice their, a pay and say, you know what, we're helping the community. We're going to help them out, right?
Yeah.
But then that coupled with the fact that you have to deal with all this drama from the board, it becomes a very stressful job.
Right.
And the board, I don't even think is qualified in most scenarios to even know what an imam should be.
Yeah, the only reason
That
why
isn't
they're
the
on the
problem,
board is
though. I don't think, and I don't, it's a matter of fact, if they knew what imam should be, then in some ways they could just be the imam. I think it's more of most communities don't have any community vision. And to be quite honest, they carry a lot of cultural baggage that they have taken from the Muslim world in their view of religious authority. So they tend to, let's be honest, if you're from anywhere in the Arab or Desi world and you wind up being an imam, it's because you were too dumb and broke to become a doctor or lawyer or an engineer.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of condescension that comes along with that. So that gets ground up in a lot of it too. I remember like my first week on the job, somebody went to the office, and I overheard them talking to one of the administrators, and they're like, "What do they pay the imam?" And I went straight to the dude. I said, "Is there a problem?" "Well, I saw where you live at, and I want to know how much they're paying you." And I told him straight up, "I make this much money." "They're paying you this much money? This is ridiculous. I donate." I said, "Look, dude, I know, number one, you ain't donating that much money to the masjid. So you just need to keep your mouth shut and keep it pushing, or just walk out." And I think that, there is this unspoken articulation that people shouldn't be getting, not even just adequate remuneration for their services, but they actually might even do well. My thing is, before I was even willing to consider becoming an imam, you had to offer everything that I was making at Penn in an IT position and then beat it. Why in the hell else am I going to move? Why am I going to take this risk? So you're going to have to pay me more than what I'm making there. You're going to have to give me better benefits. You're going to have to be competitive. And if not, then yeah, you'll be stuck with some Maulana from the old country that can't relate to nobody and that you can keep under your thumb. So I think, the problem is that imams themselves need to actually come with a better chess game. Yes, the boards are this and the boards are that, but that's what boards are.
They're going to take advantage of you if you let them, right? What I was telling Sheikh Amr was like, get some guaranteed money.
My friend Wasim he is a labor lawyer. He writes contracts, like big contracts for big players. And I had him write my contract. And that's why everybody else, except for the one masjid here, because there was a bunch of communities that had reached out to me to be imam. And when I sent them my contract, it was like crickets.
That's good.
Yeah,
so you gotta come with your A game and not be naive, man. A lot of the problem is too, a lot of imams are naive, and whether you personally care about making money or not is irrelevant. People don't respect what they don't pay for.
Yeah. And these masjids or even Muslim organizations, me and Mahin know people who have moved across the country and they end up finding themselves not being a good fit, and they end up getting let go from that Muslim organization within a few months because the people can't handle the flavor that the imam or the Muslim personality brings to that organization. They just they're not prepared to handle some of the public blowback from that kind of stuff. So, Muslim organizations are themselves lazy in the research that they do on potential employees or people they're trying to do business with.
Yeah. What do you mean as far as like that's an interesting point about community vision, and I think that's hard to articulate for most people. Even I wouldn't know if I was, let's say, running a masjid, what my vision would be. But I think I agree that there's lack of vision. I'll give you an example. So there's a masjid that my family has been affiliated with for a long time, and they're a pretty small-time masjid. And they came up, and one of the brothers, I think the VP, approached me a couple weeks ago. He says, "Hey, we have this kids program in December called Sirat al-Nabi, and we need like a big-time speaker, like someone like Yasser Qadi or Omar Suleiman." And I'm like, I gave him the honorarium prices. I'm like, we don't care how much it costs. And I'm like, really? Y'all are broke. You can't even afford like proper air conditioning. And you ain't, why would you blow like thousands of dollars on a one-time speech. You know what I'm saying? That's not even a fundraiser that will generate more income, right? And I think that's what, and I just know right then, I was like, okay, these guys, I don't know what their vision is. But I think a lot of times it's their vision is essentially like, I just want to replicate what I had back home in the motherland and over here, right? They kind of inherently have that.
They want to placate the older population, right, that is looking for nostalgia. And, you know, I actually try to be somewhat, I would say, empathetic with that because, you know, I mean, everybody's got their nostalgia. Like I got nostalgia for Coney Islands, you know. I can't eat them anymore because unfortunately all the Yemeni brothers bought up the Coney Islands in Detroit, and instead of serving at least beef, they're still pork. But, you know, nonetheless, I still got them nostalgic memories, right? So I think we're reaching a point where we're going to have to face some facts that we need different institutions to serve different populations, and that trying to put all of this into one container doesn't work, and that it often winds up becoming equivalent of trying to stuff 10 pounds of dirt in a 5-pound bag. It just simply doesn't work. Right?
So like what kind of demographics of this, let's walk through these 9 months. What kind of demographics are we talking here as far as of the masjid, the community and the board and whatnot?
Well, the community was probably, say, like 45% Desi, 45% Arab, and then, you know, some little sprinkling of, you know, few black folks, few white converts, few Africans, couple of Iranians, you know, like, you know, just some mixed bag, other type stuff. But to understand that, you need to understand the broader history behind that, right? So in this area, there was a masjid that was opened, and it was ran and controlled mostly by Arabs.
This is a Mission Viejo?
No, this is in Claremont, right?
Okay.
And I'm just being honest, right? I think, like, Desis always feel like they're playing second fiddle to the Arabs in terms of, like, in the religion, right? So they wanted to have their own thing that would placate their own culture and so forth. So they broke off from them, and that's kind of who went and opened up the Islamic Center of Inland Empire. So you went from basically like the Arab Country Club to the Desi Country Club, right? And therefore, even though you wound up having this, you know, almost like equal split between Arab and Desi who prayed there, the board and then also the trustees were all Pakistani, like essentially all Desi, right? I think there's a few people from India, but they're all Pakistani Indian. And, you know, that left some people feeling a certain kind of way. But even more importantly, they then, and they were also, most of them were older, you know, they wanted stuff to look like Pakistan. Matter of fact, one of the oldest cats on there was like, this is a Pakistani masjid, and it's about Pakistani culture, and we want this. And I'm thinking, then why in the hell did you hire an ambiguous black man from Detroit if you wanted stuff to look like Karachi? I'm just like, that don't make no damn sense. Now, what really happened that became apparent is that there was a breakdown between the board of trustees and the board of directors, which basically translated to the board of trustees were the parents of the people on the board of directors. And the board of directors were some like young, progressive, forward-thinking Desi cats that said, hey, let's shake it up. Let's bring in this like convert dude. He speaks Arabic and blah, 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 but he relates to us, right? And they kind of did it while their parents were taking a nap, which is, you know, like when I was a kid, everybody would go to the playground, white kids, black kids, Asian kids, and we'd all play ball. But as soon as like the Asian kid or the white kid's parents would roll up and see them playing basketball with us, they'd be like, oh, guys, I got to go. My parents can't see me playing with you. I can't be seen playing with a black kid, right? So in the same way, when their parents kind of woke up from their snooze and realized that some like light-skinned black dude was running things who, you know, wore suits and ties, they're like, no, this ain't never going to work. And they just began to shut it down.
Do you think it had to do with the fact that you were black, or that you just had like an American culture?
Well, those are inseparable. But oh yeah, definitely. If I was a white convert, I would have had far more cultural, psychological capital to sway over them. I'm not saying I would have been like Svengali, I could just mind control them, but I most certainly would have had more social capital. But ain't nobody, I'm just, most Muslims from that background are not sitting there trying to listen to some dude who's African American and then they can't even understand, because that was a part of it. Like, Imam Marc says he's black, but he doesn't look black. I'm like, because for you, black is Somali, dude. Like, you don't understand black in America. You only understand black in your country, which means like illegal immigrants from Sudan or something, right? So the race part definitely, played a role in that.
So with that being said, like, it's pretty evident of like you weren't gonna like stick around too long with that kind of environment. But let's segue into this whole concept of like Arabs and like the racism in the Muslim community, right? As I alluded to you like offline, is that many people think I think there are instances where my theory is there are instances where there is racism, and there are certain examples in my own life that I can point to that I've seen. The most blatant example that comes to my head actually is I know a family back where I come from with 2 daughters, and the youngest daughter got married first, and she married an African American brother who was extremely qualified, both religiously, and he's an attorney, and they pretty much blackballed her. And their second daughter married a white convert who's also an attorney, in my opinion, not as good of a Muslim, and they like threw this like gigantic party. So like to me that is like an evident that's an anecdote, so to speak. But I think a lot of it is stereotyping versus racism. I think that's where a kind of, because if you see somebody like some of my friends and I were talking the other day, like let's say you go outside and you see a bunch of folks who are like skinheads walking around, and on the other side of the street you see a bunch of brothers, but they're like maybe dressed in like urban clothing. They would gravitate toward, they would feel safer with the guys in urban clothing. Now on the flip side, if there was normal white folks walking around, they would gravitate towards white folks. But I think it's like there's an image in their head of like where does trouble come from? I remember one time I was in Atlanta, and like my mother-in-law, like a black guy happened to walk across our side of the street, and she like locks the doors of the car. Right? I remember I think that's a story, but I've seen that happen too. But I think a lot of it is fear more so necessarily than racism. Now, I definitely think that there's racism in the within Desis and Arabs as far as colorism goes. I mean, there's a multi-million-dollar industry, I think, of selling like skin bleach to make Desi girls and Desi guys lighter. It's funny because when I went to Bangladesh, and when I first time I was 16 years old, my cousin's like, you should eat more oranges. I'm like, why? You could become more fusha. Fusha is like lighter skin color.
But that's a little bit unfair. The whole skin color thing, because that's around the world, right?
Yeah.
It's not just unique to Desis. That industry is flourishing in China, in Africa, everywhere.
But I mean, to go back to address your point about, you think that the issue with Arabs and Desis is more of stereotyping than of racism. I think one is the biggest mistake is assuming that it has to be one or the other. And I think they are both stereotyping, but they are also racist, because racism isn't just simply about, I don't like you for who you are. It's also about, I'm going to impose things upon you. I'm going to make life difficult for you. I'm going to, right? I mean, this is why, racism in America is not about the fact that white people just don't like black people. That's irrelevant. Like, I don't really care if somebody doesn't like me because I'm black. But if you're going to impede me, right, to what I want to do, then I have an issue. So I think the mistake is that we are assuming or trying to impose a binary framework, and in fact, it's really both of these. I believe that there has been issues of things being denied to black folks in the Muslim community by non-blacks, and then there is just the stereotypical black people don't know anything. Do you know Fatiha? All this kind of, other stuff. So I think it's a mistake to make that assumption of some sort of binary that, well, it's really this one because it's not that. No, it's both. And to be blunt, how would you, as a Desi who has a much more privileged state or status in the community, how would you be able to come to that conclusion, not only for myself as an individual African American, but those of us as a collective? I think this is the proof right there of racism that rings very similar between the kind of racism in white America, which anytime black folks start to bring up a conversation of structural issues, the first thing is shooting it down. Oh, it can't be that. It can't be that. It can't be that. Like, are you kidding me? So yeah, I would completely turn that on its head.
Well, you said a word that has been a buzzword recently, at least on our episode, which is privilege. And a lot of us have been having discussions about privilege and all the issues surrounding that. What do you mean by us people who are Indian having privilege in the community as opposed to African Americans? Do you really feel that Indian and people of Indian Pakistani descent have more privilege?
Yes. One, we had to break up privilege, I think, also break it up out of this monolith, and then there's different flavors and stripes of privilege. If you walk into a masjid, nobody asks you if you know Al-Fatiha. If you are in a position of leadership, people will not challenge you either in the same way nor to the same extent that they would if you were black. I had an incident the other day of a woman who was asking me about something. And then she began to argue with me. And I just was blunt with her. I said, I think if my name was not Marc Manley, and if I was from the same village or around the corner where you grew up from, you would have took the answer I gave with you and kept walking. But you repeatedly come to me and say, well, you said this, but my sheikh says that. And you says this, but in Pakistan we do this, right? So clearly the issue is you don't respect who I am, despite, every major imam in America, at least the ones that I'm close with, will give, testimony to my capabilities as an imam. I have written letters from scholars over in Saudi Arabia and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, you're a black man, do you know Al-Fatiha? So when I say privilege, I don't have an issue necessarily with certain kinds of privilege. I'm not, the prophets are privileged over us, scholars are in certain ways more privileged than other people in terms of, according to certain things that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about that. I don't have an issue necessarily with privilege, but I do have when privilege becomes not only because you have access to things that I don't, but then when you are also thwarting my access, right? So that's the same way, like with racism in America or talking about white privilege. White privilege just isn't a discussion about white people having things that black people don't have, right? It's not like hasad where, I don't want you to have it. But privilege in America as it relates to whites has always and continues to come at the expense of black folks. And anybody that seriously tries to argue this point is woefully, like Jahal Marakkab, compoundedly ignorant of American history. And I would challenge anybody just to read about the history of banking in this country to understand how, just as an example, white privilege has been a tale of white people privileging themselves at the expense of disprivileging, if you can use that word, black folks.
Yeah, I was just listening to a little bit of what you're saying. So in the first part, regarding being an imam of a different background, and then, for example, like the Pakistani community not accepting you, based on the fact that you are an African American revert. I get that happens, but I'm thinking about this on the other angle too. I've seen it happen to Indians and Pakistanis where maybe Somalis, the Arabs will say, oh, well, you don't speak Arabic, so you're not really qualified to be an imam either. And so, I mean, I think it depends on what community you get into, because the Arab community might say that about the Somalis, and the Somalis will maybe call the Pakistani the Ajnabi, right? So I think it all really depends on what masjid it is, because I've seen it many times where like an Arab will come out and say, well, they can't even recite Quran properly. How can he be an imam of a masjid, right? Or
I mean, don't take it that I'm saying that this is some unique trait amongst the Desis. You were asking about my particular experience and the masjid that I was imam at that was, controlled predominantly by Desis. So I'm only giving you my personal experience.
I think it was.
I don't mean to convey that as projected forward that speaking in universal terms about privilege or racism, that it's purely the Desis who are bad actors.
Right. Well, yeah, I think the context was in the context of Desis versus African Americans. Desis have more privilege in the Muslim community, right?
No, I think what it is, I'm just only bringing it up because I think some listeners might have taken it like, hey, you know what? Like, it's only Desis that are doing this thing, and the reality is that it's around everywhere, no matter where you go.
Oh no, trust me. I mean, I had a few, I had a few Arab cats that tried to step to me too. Matter of fact, I remember there was a brother that wrote me a note after a khutbah in Arabic, telling me that, wearing a tie was a sign of the cross and blah, 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 and then the reverse is really interesting within the Arab context, is that in some ways the Arabs would accept me maybe a modicum more, not because of necessarily my skill set per se, but because of being able to speak Arabic fluently, being able to recite the Quran properly, being able to sound like an Arab when I recite and speak. Then it was sort of like, MashaAllah, brother, you look like an Arab. I would get that all the time, right? I mean, unfortunately, I don't really look South Asian, so I never had anybody say, MashaAllah, brother, you look like you're from Pakistan, right? Where the Arabs, it was like, MashaAllah, brother, you look like you're from Morocco. MashaAllah, brother, you look like Egyptian. And I would say, well, actually, maybe just Egyptian people look like black people, but, I don't want to offend anybody. So it was that kind of reverse racism where you're giving me a compliment, but in reality, it's still an insult, and you have a lack of capacity to see me only in how I fit into something that aggrandizes you.
Sure. I remember, as an example, Sim, remember the show with Chow? Yeah. And Imam Marc, I don't know if you heard if you know Abdurrahman Chow.
I don't know him personally. I've followed him for years, but no, I don't know him personally.
We did the podcast with him during ISNA weekend, and he's telling us a story about how he goes to his local masjid. The imam doesn't show up, so he ends up leading the prayer. And then afterwards, like, this brother comes up to, like, it sounds like an Arab brother. He's like, "Your brother, where did you learn to read Quran?" And then he's like, how did you learn? He's like, I just read it, I just learned. And he learned it in madrasa when he was like a kid. Right? And he was, yes, but how? It's like, by practicing. He's like, and it was like the guy couldn't digest the fact that this Asian dude was reciting Quran properly. I think that was was more or less the point of it there. But
don't you think a lot of this is just natural ways of human beings now getting to know each other in modern day? I think for the thousands of years of human history, there's no point in history that is like this, where we're actually living with so many different ethnicities and trying to get to know each other. Some of these things are going to be, part of the growing pains that we all experience. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to diminish the African American experience or anyone's experience with racism or stereotypes or whatever, how much do you think?
Again, it's not so much that this is outside the pale of, the human experience or something. The problem is that I don't see any effort. Matter of fact, I see resistance, if anything, of trying to move beyond our base nature. And, I'll get preachy for a minute. We're not dealing with a secular community, right? We're dealing with a religious community that has religious values. And one of those religious values is dealing with our differences, right? I mean, clearly, just look at the Sirah, right? The companions had beef with one another because they came from different races and different tribes. But the Prophet ﷺ spoke to it. Now, he didn't castigate anybody. He didn't throw anybody out. I mean, I'm not making takfir on anybody for being a racist, right? But he also, took steps to, look, we are going to get beyond this, right? This is just not okay. It might be our human nature or our base nature, but we're also going to move beyond that. And I, for the most part, don't see a grand effort. Matter of fact, I see more energy putting in trying to defeat the argument that there is racism than there is of dealing with racism. So it's a departure from the spirit of the Prophet ﷺ to deal with this issue. That's,
Yeah.
I think, just case in point, I feel like the last 10 minutes of our conversation has been more about trying to find ways to humanize it. There's no need to humanize it. We're all human. It is a human issue. But the last time I checked, we were also Muslim. And this is something that isn't just like a feel-good issue. This is an issue that the Prophet ﷺ took to heart and made sure that was dealt with.
It's become increasingly difficult for me as a editor for the podcast because ultimately everything that comes through these microphones and goes on the show is really my decision. And when some of these guys on our show talk about African American issues, and then we get feedback from our listeners that, hey, you guys should be talking about this, it's become so difficult for me that I'm kind of at the verge of just telling these guys, hey, no one's even allowed to talk about this topic anymore, because it seems like it's just something that we can't have intelligent conversations around, because there's just too many emotions, too many charged words about privilege and about us not being black, or we just don't, we're not allowed to be in that, have that conversation. What kind of advice would you give us?
Well, I think that, one, I don't think that, it's not that I feel that you guys can't talk about it. It's just that you should talk about it, chop it up, whatever. But just understand that whatever you cook from whatever you chopped up just might not be palatable to black people, right? Maybe it'll be meaningful to you and your audience, but it might not be meaningful, which I'm going to assume, all right? I'm sure there's like some black folks out there that listen to you, but probably not a predominantly black American Muslim audience, right? You just have to be willing to accept that even though it tastes great to you, right, it's just not going to maybe take great to us, right? It's like when you go to Eid or you go to Iftar and y'all put that hot, spicy stuff on watermelon. We love watermelon, but man, I can't do fruit with spice on it, man. It's just like, and brothers would be like, brother, you have to have this. It's so delicious. I'm like, I'm sure it's delicious to you. Just give me a hamburger, right? So,
Imam Marc, that fruit with spices on it is fantastic. I'm deeply offended by.
He's triggered, actually.
Are you serious?
No,
because I know some people eat that. It's disgusting.
No, I love it,
right?
man.
I can't stand that, dude.
Talk about it, discuss it. Just don't get offended when we're not moved by whatever conclusions you come to, or even perhaps highly disagree with you.
Well, the automatic assumption is that we don't know what it's like, because anyone who knows me, Sim, on the podcast, knows that I grew up in a very a bad neighborhood when I was young, and there were drive-bys, and there were guys slinging drugs right across the street from my house. Literally, we would hear gunshots, and they. I mean, it wasn't the city, but it was like one of those cities right next to the city, you know, and just because I didn't grow up in a black neighborhood, they make it seem like that I don't know what it's like to grow up in, you know, from a unprivileged background, you know. So it seems like, because I grew up in a Latino, an Indian Pakistani neighborhood where there were a lot of different ethnicities that are probably first generation immigrants, but there was a lot of crime in that neighborhood as well. So it's become an issue where we know what it's like, but it's not that every Indian Pakistani is just like, you know, devoid of understanding what the African Americans are experiencing. We understand that we felt racism. We went to all white schools, and we had to sit on lunch tables alone, and to the point where I know I ended up just stopped going to lunch, and I ended up going to the library and just ended up reading books because you know, white kids wouldn't even talk to me. Actually, African Americans were cool in school when I used to go, and they would have they were the popular kids in school, and the immigrants were like, you know, they were sitting on the lunch table all alone.
No, I'm going to tell you this right now. My first friend ever in my life was a black guy. Yeah. His name was Wally. The reason why is we were in an all-white Italian school, and he saw me fighting Italians every day after school, and he would fight them in school. And he said, "Listen, if we don't stick together, they're gonna fight us."
Yeah.
So he made this elaborate story where he cut his arm and he gave me some blood and said we're blood brothers, whatever, right? But the whole point is that we recognize each other's problems. You know, like it's tough sometimes when you're in the oddball. You know, especially, and anyone who's grown up around Italians know that they're racist people, right? I mean, the grandfather should have called me eggplant when I walked in. He didn't even really mean it, but he's like, "Oh, who's this eggplant?" You know, and you're supposed to look like, you know, and it's like offensive, you know. I mean, for me, I kind of chuckle because I'm like, I know he's old and he's from the old country, right? But I mean, you know, I could get how it's offensive to people. You know what I mean? I know he didn't mean bad.
What does that even mean? I've never heard that before.
Oh, eggplant? Well, so what he was trying to say is because I'm dark skinned and my hair, I used to have curly hair when I was younger, really curly. It was almost like a, you know, straight up. So he's trying to act like an eggplant, like an eggplant. I'm purple, I'm dark skinned, and I got like, you know, like curly hair. You know what I mean? Like hair.
I'm going to add it to my vocabulary.
Yeah, whatever.
No, you can't.
No, it's a very racial. It's a very racist.
Oh, okay.
It's a very racist term. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, don't add it to your vocabulary. God, you say that to somebody, they're gonna knock you out.
Mahin, holy cow, you are a suburban white ditty, all white inside.
But the point being, though, is that yes, I mean, I think the problem with that is, though, Sim, is this: is that unfortunately, a lot of people say that when they hear ghetto or hood, they think it automatically means African American. Yeah. And that's not true. I mean, anyone who grew up in Chicago around here, or even maybe perhaps like Michigan where he is, you know that ghettos have very different people. It can be black, it could be white, it could be Hispanic, it could be Arabs, it could be Asians. I mean, we have them all over the country, but unfortunately the stereotype is that you're only in the hood if it's African American. Yeah. Right? And so you can't share my experience. I think it works both ways. That sometimes the African Americans will say,
let me problematize that for you for a second, right? Yeah. No, I would articulate it that many people in this country may start off in the hood, but only black people have remained perpetually and generationally in the hood. How many Arabs remain 3, 4, 5 generations broke in the hood?
Why is that? That's something we're trying to figure out.
3, 4, 5 generations broke in the hood. Even how many Latinos, right? Because even Latinos have been able to, right? Why is it, right, that the one group that has had the most difficult time transitioning out of that it's been almost semi-permanent, has been Black Americans?
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we got enough time to go into that, right? But
I mean, like a little summary.
The simple answer is white people in America have leveraged the state as a power to not only privilege them, but to target, berate, attack, disempower, and dispossess black people from the time they brought us here in boats and every time thereafter, right? I mean, The other day I made a really interesting, if I can say that without sounding arrogant, right? I made a series of tweets that actually kind of addressed, this issue. And I was saying that, we came here in slave ships, right? And were brutally oppressed and raped and murdered and all this other stuff, right? But then, right, we were freed, but immediately whites made the 13th Amendment. Then we escaped the South and the brutality of that and were met with an equally racist North with its scientific racism and eugenics, right? We built Black Wall Street. Whites literally burned it to the ground.
You talking about
we
Tulsa,
tried to
Oklahoma?
engage America through nonviolent protest, and we were met with lynching and bodily harm. We tried to raise up a leader from amongst us like Martin Luther King, and they shot and killed him. We even tried to make our way through sports, and we had somebody like Jackie Robinson who made it to the major leagues, and white people came up with a rule called 3 strikes and you're out. We tried to exercise our Second Amendment rights like the NRA advocates, and white people came up immediately with the Mulford Act when the Black Panthers and black people tried to arm themselves for self-protection. We try to cooperate with the police when we're pulled over and they say things like, "Don't worry, ma'am, we only kill black people," right? So if you look at the history of this country, the problem is non-black people, and I'm going to lump all the rest of y'all into this, are trying to have a conversation of which you are woefully ignorant of historical facts over hundreds of years. And it is no other explanation for why black folks have remained in the predicament that they have. My own family, as an example, like lots of other black families in Detroit, were either unable to own homes like their white counterparts, were unable to join unions like their white counterparts, that allowed the same poor whites to move up through the social economic ladder, to have jobs with pensions, to buy homes that had equity. Black folks were forced to buy homes that were underwater, and that after a period of time, they themselves couldn't even sell. We had to abandon our home in Detroit because it got so bad. Now, why did it get so bad? Because there were no jobs. Black people could not get jobs, right? It was a top-down. Now, it's always pitched as black people were lazy. It's a cultural deficiency, which is like essentially the new, more articulated, more nuanced version of eugenics, right? That is just a cultural problem with black people, right? The state has been the number one night and day oppressor of black people, and the reason why. I mean, we opened up black banks. They were purposely engineered to fail. So when we talk about the very word ghetto, or we talk about the very word hood, what we are talking but not admitting is a socially engineered project. And this is why other immigrant groups can come to this country and move up, because they are not the targets of a social engineering state-sponsored program to keep them down.
All right, so I'm listening to that, and I agree with a lot of points that you said. I mean, there's a lot of there were definitely programs by the government to keep African Americans down. We're talking about,
but there were also programs
cocaine.
that were privileging whites, right? I mean,
Of
how
course,
do you think white people got the farms and the land grants that they did, right? Like, we were dispossessed of land. We were not allowed to have land grants. But those same land grants, sponsored by who? Underwritten by who? The state, the government.
Federal government, actually. Yeah.
Of course. So what I'm saying is, from the time we came here in chains up until the present day, there has been a repurposing of state and government assets to privilege whites, but at the same time, hold blacks down. When you come up with a 3 strikes and you're out rule, or the war on drugs, and you take an entire generation or two of able-bodied black men and put them in prison for nearly life sentences for the same crimes that their white counterparts don't get. You decimate an entire generation of people that will do what? Those are the men that are going to work and provide the economics for their families. Well, how in the hell are black people supposed to thrive when an insane number of able-bodied working black men are the targets of law enforcement to go to jail?
Yeah.
Does this apply to any other group in America?
No, I agree with what you're saying in that sense, and I think that there is a lot of historical context here. For example, like you just mentioned a little bit of it about guns and cocaine coming into the black areas, and then the government trying to start a war on drugs campaign after infusing them with drugs. And I get there's a lot of historical context, but I'm looking at look, I'm gonna keep it 100 with you. I live in Chicago, right, and I've gone all over Chicago, the North Side, South Side, and while I get that there's a historical context, I've seen things. I mean, I have friends. My cousins were gangbangers, right? I mean, and what I'm saying is like there's a certain culture within those individuals, not all of them, but there's a glorification. Like, for example, drill music came out of Chicago. 10-year-olds making Facebook videos about killing people, right? And these kind of songs.
Right, and where are their fathers that might give them another perspective?
I agree. I agree.
So when you say historical, see, this is the problem of even using terminology historical perspective, because the word historical gives the psychological implication that this all happened in the past, but it's not going on in the present. So it's another way to kind of put the blame on these lazy black people that are just culturally deficient, and they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, look, if let's say that 10-year-old, look, they're making that music. Granted, I agree with you that it's one of the reasons why they're doing it is because there's a lack of a male role model, and there's a lack of a family structure. Broken families is one of the major issues that are affecting those communities. But on the other hand, what I'm asking you is, and what I'm observing is this: there are music labels that make money off of this type of music, and the culture in itself. I'm not saying all of them are that way, but it's almost glorified in a way. And I do understand that it's not all African Americans that are buying this kind of music. It's suburban white kids, everybody else.
If so-called black music was reliant upon black patronage, there would be no black music.
Yeah.
No,
I understand what you're saying. Yes, I get that. But what I'm saying though is that when you use it to make money, right? Isn't that? I mean,
aren't you? I think what Mort is saying, like, are you feeding into the loop?
Yeah. What I'm saying is, are they causing a deliberate
Black America? Right? Are you going to indict all of Black America on a few record executives?
No. I think what Mort is saying is that we're black society putting itself into a loop of like a vicious cycle of.
They didn't create the cycle, right? I mean, think about it. Black people certainly didn't vote for no 3 strikes and you're out type stuff, right? This is the cycle that the black kid that you're saying listens to this or glorifies it. Where's the man? Where's the man to teach these men to be men? Are they just absent because we just have some natural racial predilection towards being deadbeat dads and shiftless Negroes? Where did they go? Who put them away?
Yeah, no, like I said, I agree from the very beginning that a broken household is one of the main problems that are affecting African American youth.
The household.
What was that?
Who broke it?
Who broke the household?
No, it's probably, like I said, the government program. It's probably the government. I mean,
Not
these are.
Probably.
I'm sorry?
Not probably.
No, but what I'm saying is, are you saying every single African American who doesn't have a father is only because of the government? I mean, are we taking away some accountability that maybe some of they're genuinely bad people? I mean, there's some who are bad and there's some that are good. But I mean, I don't think we can. I don't know how we could just say every single child is a victim of that, right? I mean, I just don't know how we can make that correlation.
Then I think I don't think you quite understand the massive shadow that the state casts over Black America. Black America is a socially engineered product from corner to corner. And there isn't any aspect of black life that has not been hammered and shaped by the state. And that, yes, this is like something that various black groups have tried to do to make some of these changes, right? And this is one of my biggest condemnations of so-called Sunni Islam in America. And not even, I don't mean Sunni Islam of like Arabs and Desis. I mean, I'm blaming black American Muslims.
Yeah,
have been
collectively,
so
all of us,
caught
right?
up into the authenticity game of, well, do I know Fatiha? Like, forget about the brother asked you if you know Fatiha. We now, in a kind of like Stockholm syndrome way, do I know Fatiha? Right? Black American Islam has been so caught up into a kind of apolitical quietism and authenticity game that the one system that I really feel that gives black folks a chance to re-envision themselves outside of a system that has their worst intentions at heart has completely turned its back on them. So I get very, very frustrated with black American Muslims, and I came out of Salafiyah, and I still identify with it sometimes in certain ways. But one of my biggest issues with Salafiyah is like, why are we not going back to our communities and trying to help our people? Because at the end of the day, you can blame the Arabs, you can blame the Desis, they're racist and stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, man, as you said, people are people. If you own something, you want it to look like you, talk like you, walk like you, right? And I think this is where the black American community needs to come to another step of maturation and to build and sacrifice and build their institutions so that we can reach our people. And, by no means, I mean, look, I'm imam of a predominantly immigrant community here in Southern California. I mean, there's probably like 4 black people that come to Middle Ground, right? All the rest of it is predominantly Desi and some Arab, right? So I don't have any issue of, I'm trying to be some sort of like, neo-black nationalist. But at the same time, I really do want to be able to help my people. And
I get that. I get that. I mean, the reality is that, look, we're Muslims, but everyone has
Black American Muslims just have not sacrificed in the same way that immigrant Muslims have sacrificed.
I agree.
So I do believe that there's an onus, but when you start talking about these other cultural issues or about why are people doing, I just don't think you completely understand the way that the government has so completely circumscribed black life in America. I just don't think you understand it.
That could be it. I mean, maybe I just don't understand the gravity of it. But like I said, at the end of the day, I do believe that while wanting to better your own community doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to become a nationalist or an ethnocentric person. I think that if you, a person like yourself who wants to highlight some of the struggles that African American Muslims are facing, I think it's a great thing. Because none of us are going to know how that feels. We're not part of that, right? Meaning the reality is that even in Islam, we have subcultures. There are Muslims from different parts of the world, and we're not always going to be able to see things through, the lens of other people. So, I don't think anybody's going to misunderstand what you're saying to be like you're an Afrocentric person. I don't think it's going to come down to that. I think everyone does that for themselves already, right? Pakistanis will have Pakistani fun.
Yeah, my primary, and I hate to even use this word, but my primary identity is Muslim. Everything comes after that.
Right.
So I identify first and foremost as a Muslim. Therefore, I can, and probably if you were to add up all of my Muslim friends, it's probably a split between Black American and non-Black American. So the brother that I run Middle Ground with, he's from an Indian background. We have a total different background, and yet we're like family. So sometimes people misunderstand my very passionate stance on things of race and Black America, because it's a reality that I live in. Is very personal to me. Sure. But at the same time, like, I don't, middle ground isn't just for Black people, or I'm up in here running some like neo Black Panther type of thing. At the same time, I'm not apologetic about wanting to reach Black America, because to be honest, just from a pragmatic point of view, Black folks in America are predominantly the group of people that are most interested in hearing the message of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. We have to give da'wah to everybody. But I'm just saying, like, categorically, that's been the one group of people out of all Americans that's been most receptive and most interested in that message. So I believe that there's also some just pragmatic issues. And we're also, Black people in America are we are the progenitors of culture here. So I really feel like all Muslims are doing themselves a disservice by not being, not just sympathetic, but dealing with the Black community to help solve its issues. Even if you just I don't really care that much about Black people. If you care about Islam in America, you better care about Black people. It's like what Dr. Jackson said. Black people are the Banu Hashim of America.
Let's see. Imam Marc, I wanted to maybe summarize these points here. Overall, would you say that your approach or what you believe is that on an individual level, people should have accountability, but on a systemic level, people should recognize that there are injustices going on and fight those injustices? Is that a fair assessment of kind of what you're, talking about here? Because let's for you, for example, right? You're on your own grinding yourself, right? You're doing what you need to do, right? You're not, you don't seem to come across somebody who's blaming anybody for your own situation. Like we talked, and we'll get into this in a little bit. Like you had a falling out with this masjid after 9 months, and you could have ran off and been unmosqued and went on this unmosqued campaign, but you just
I hate that word.
But you know what I'm saying?
Should be slapped to sleep that uses that word.
Right. But at the same time, I think it's nuanced enough to understand that, okay.
Look, I had my beef with them people, but at the end of the day, man, it's qadr, it's maktuban, it's whatever that it was, and I look at it as this is an experience that Allah wanted me to go through, however negative that it was. And at the end of the day, if I am going to be doing this imam thing, then I have to be committed to the Muslims, right? Whether they're Black, white, Latino, Chinese, Martian, whatever, right? And therefore, if I'm going to be committed to that, I have to be about building. So it didn't work out. It didn't work out, man. It's like it's like a fine girl. It's like, damn, things didn't work out. She was fine.
You gotta try though.
You know what I mean? So you keep it pushing, and though, matter of fact, there's people that now from that community that they come through middle ground once in a while. They understood that my leaving wasn't about giving anybody the middle finger. I wasn't saying screw you to the board. I wasn't saying. I said, you know what, whatever, man. Y'all do whatever you're gonna do. I came to California to build, and I have to believe that Allah put me in this position and is going to support me. I have to have that kind of faith that the Prophet ﷺ had, that, فَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. I have to have that kind of faith that Allah is going to give me that support. And alhamdulillah, it's been, it's been happening. So no, I don't have any, look, man, I'm only on this rock for a few decades, and I'm sure statistically I've already passed the halfway mark. So I don't really have time to be invested or to waste emotional, spiritual, intellectual capital on being bitter at some people when I need to build. For real. And that's why I get really ticked off when I hear this unmasked. I'm like, man, shut up, man. Get in there, dude. Get in there, right? It's like Mike Tyson said, everybody got a plan until they get hit. I don't care how much jump rope you do. I don't care how tight your footwork is. You're going to get hit. Everybody gets hit. And I say this to converts too. Are Muslims racist? Yes. Not all of them, but many are. But just get in there. Sometimes, loving for your brother what you want for yourself is not always, It's not like porno love, man. It's not always about you getting yours, right? You got to get it. You might have to show your brother some tough love. Like, you know what? Y'all might be some racist jokers, but I'm gonna be up in here every single day, and I'm gonna wear you down with Quran and Sunnah. I'm gonna wear you down with لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. I'm gonna wear you down with that. For me, I've always been more like I'm gonna crash the party. I'm here because I believe in the truth. Number one, this identity politics stuff has got to go. I'm in this masjid because I believe in the truth. If you don't like that, too bad. Now, maybe it's different because, whatever, I'm 6'5", 270 pounds. Maybe it's just because I'm a big dude. My last name is Manley. I don't know what it is. But I'm here because of the truth of things. I ain't here to get a hand job from nobody. Right? Now, if I can get some brotherly love along the way, that's cool. And I would prefer it. I would much, much prefer it to be that way. Because it feels much better.
Look, I love the attitude that you have,
first
though.
and foremost.
No, I love the attitude that you have, because a lot of times I think a lot of people get caught in the failure, right? And I think as a community, as Muslims, we're always complaining. And I'm going to shift this a little bit, but you'll find a lot of people I know among the Arab community will be like, yo, blame Israel for everything. We're stuck in a bad position. And I feel like saying, yeah, while it might be true that there may be some Zionist thing going on, whatever it is, but you're in a situation. You got to make the best of it, no matter what it is. You keep it pushing. And you got to
look at yourself, right? You have to look at yourself, and what role do you play in that? And I also came to realize in my role as imam at that masjid, you know what? I'm probably not the right person for this particular audience. It's like a comedian, right? It's like, man, just nobody's laughing at my jokes. It don't mean I'm not funny. I'm just not the comedian for this room. So I had to go and, kind of like start my own stand-up club where the people that came and said, oh, hey, Imam Marc, man, he's a funny dude. Let's go listen to his stand-up. And after a while, I've been able to win over people too. I mean, you got to wear people down, man. We always, especially converts, man, we love, and I'm just saying, black folks, converts, sometimes, we have certain sensitivities, especially for black folks, because, we have the right to be sensitive. We've had a pretty awful go at the last several hundred years in this country. But at the same time, that can make us hyper-reactionary. And I know that about myself. That sometimes I have to check that, bite down a little bit, and be like, you know what? I might internally be saying F you, but externally, I'm like, I'm gonna just wear this cat down, man. I'm gonna wear him down with love, and that ultimately, I'm not even trying to win hearts. I'm trying to do what the Prophet ﷺ did. So it's ultimately just about truth. Converts need to be about the truth. Non-converts too, right? I'm just saying, but the challenge is that the way Islam is pitched as an identity and all this stuff, this is not an identities change, right? When I was younger, I probably would have been more of a liberal. I'm definitely somebody now that would be considered conservative. I got a Second Amendment sticker on my pickup truck, and I'm a member of the NRA. I have a daughter. People's identities change when their life changes sometimes. But even if I would have been more liberal at 19 when I first became Muslim, right, what has sustained my Islam? Because I hate being asked, why did you become Muslim? It doesn't matter. Why have I been Muslim for 27 years? What has sustained me for a quarter of a century? The truth. And a commitment, an unwavering commitment to the truth, even if I wavered and faltered in my commitment to it.
Sure. Can you talk about converts from the early 90s when you became Muslim versus people who convert today? I know we talked a little bit about that. And I remember I think you were like 19, 20 years old back then?
19 years old.
Something like 8% body fat or something? And 6'5"?
Yeah, man, I was a beast.
You playing football?
I was beautiful. I had a full head of hair. It was a whole different game than it is now. It just, I was saying today in our study group this morning that I have friends of mine back in Detroit that live certain kind of lifestyle, that are caught up doing things, right? Muslim. They're doing things they shouldn't do. And I can call them out on certain things that they're doing in the realm of morality. Like, come on, man, dude, quit, what's up with you smashing women and this other stuff, man? Get your life right, right? Or why are you screwing up, man? You don't want to go back to jail, that kind of thing, right? And they'll take it like men. But if I were to one moment implicate that if I were to question their faith versus questioning the morality, I would be in a fight for my life. And I feel that converts today, man, they're just soft. They're just soft, man. I mean, I came in, I came in through Salafiyah. And one of the benefits, and I'm not trying to be doctrinal versus Sufi or whatever, right? And I don't really, I don't consider myself, doctrinally Salafi anymore. But one of the benefits is like, things are black and white.
So, right? I'm going to talk about that for a little bit, Imam. So I think some of us here and some of the listeners come from a kind of a similar background where when we first came, growing up, I wasn't all that. My parents were good, alhamdulillah. But me, as far as being practicing, I wasn't. And I kind of gravitated toward Salafi a little bit. And then I think it's the infamous, the Salafi burnout, right? Where it's just kind of you burn out a little bit because you're just going, you're, I mean, everybody has their own reasons, but that brings us to now. But the thing is that I wanted to mention was, I definitely think there were some good things that came out of it, but I feel like right now in my life, where I am at right now, I don't feel the need to and want to belong to any particular group. I feel like those groups, I mean, they're cool. They have their purpose. I don't hate anybody part of any group, but I feel like when you say I'm, Salafi or Sufi or Hizb ut-Tahrir or whatever it is, right? You have to automatically defend things that may not be the truth, right? You automatically have to just take positions that don't really necessarily you don't agree with on the inside, but you're just doing it. You're so passionate about the group that you find yourself defending things. And I feel like right now a lot of people, maybe even in your community, I've seen it in my community, fall into that trap. And somebody may be guilty or right or wrong, but they just can't come out and say it because they feel like they're betraying a whole group of people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can comment on all of it. I can just say I'll use myself. I hate to project myself as an individual as some sort of universal truth, but I will say I was very immature. When I was 19 years old, I was very immature, and that's why I was drawn to something like Salafiyah. And that probably could have been Sufiyah or whatever. It could have been any group because I was immature. And I was not, the mold had not quite set, right? So part of getting that mold to set on who I was, I needed a little bit of group identity, and I think I benefited from that for a little bit. But then eventually I was like, okay, this is counterproductive to who I really ultimately want to be. So I transitioned beyond that. So I always like to say, I kind of have quasi-Salafi / Maliki, inclinations, but I don't really self-identify with that, anymore. And I think the reality is that some people need groups at certain times in their lives because, I don't know, they just need buttressing or shoring up. But I don't believe that works in the long term. I mean, let's be honest, man. People losing their faith because Nu'man Ali Khan wanted to get down with polygyny, which I'm all about team polygyny. How are you losing your faith over somebody?
And we were talking about this, man. We were like, listen, someone made a funny joke. I'm not going to say who I'm wrong here, but it was kind of funny because right when we found out about this, we kind of knew about it. We were sitting on the story for a while. We didn't want to break it because we kind of knew about it, but we were waiting for it to come out. And one of the guys here was like, yo, you realize that when this drops, that half of Pakistan is going to become Murtaddeen, right? Because they really, they trust this guy so much that it's going to be a problem for them.
It's ridiculous, right? Or now, I mean, there's this thing coming out now about Tariq Ramadan.
Right.
And some ex-Salafi. Number one, man, you come with I'm an ex, man, get out of my face. It's what's the guy's, something Nawaz, the guy over in Britain.
Oh, Majid Nawaz, yeah.
Majid Nawaz, who's an ex-terrorist or ex-extremist. Man, that don't even sound right. I mean, that sounds like something Tom Clancy would put in one of his novels about Muslims. It just doesn't even use an ex. I mean, that
ex-suicide bomber.
And then you're in a strip club.
Yeah, right.
So you went all the way from an extremist to a strip club. That sounds like the reverse of the typical ISIS cat that goes from the strip club to the suicide vest. I mean, it just, all that stuff is just a bunch of nonsense. I mean, but to go back to the original point is, some people need groups. Some people have to go through that for periods of time. I don't recommend it for long periods because you become overly dependent. It's like sleeping pills. You know, maybe something happens to you and you need to take Ambien, right, so that you can get sleep. But you got to be careful staying on that stuff. Otherwise, it's like you can't get to sleep without it. And then if somebody takes it away, you're jacked.
Yeah, you're not
growing.
That's
my issue with groups, you know, is that, you know, do whatever you got to do, man. But, you know, work towards the truth. And I don't mean like, I mean, yeah, we all have our takes on it. Just work towards those two ultimate truths that are non-negotiable. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Those are the two non-negotiable truths. If you live up to it today, great. If you trip and fall and you don't live up to it tomorrow, well, inshallah, there's a day after that, right? Don't allow that to inhibit you from the truth. That's what I give the advice for converts. It's like, look, man, dude, the reality is you're outgunned. And people have their cultures, and people have things that they're very passionate about, that they're very sensitive about. And you're going to have to navigate that and stand up for yourself. And if you're not willing to do that, well, then this is probably just this is just going to wind up being a summer fling for you.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. Because I totally understand. Like, there's people that I've talked to about Islam that agree with a lot of their tenets, and I know I don't know if you know Dr. Muhammad Gilan. He did a podcast on his series on his show where he talks about letters from a girl who's considering Islam, and he like was breaking down all the cultural dynamics that she's gonna have to deal with, right? Depending on which Muslim she's around, and I think it's really amazing that. You think about it, that you converted in 1992 and now 25 years later you're still on it. Versus, and I remember I was talking to some brothers, reminiscing about some guys we used to know back in the day, and like even people who like studied overseas, they went overseas and they went to Medina, did Arabic, and then they're like completely off the grid. You know what I mean? And some of these were born Muslims. So, like, what do you tell? I mean, generally, it sounds like, okay, hold on to the absolute truth that we know, the two, but like, reality is people got drama in their lives and they got issues going on, and that affects a lot of things. But the truth is what allows you to compartmentalize drama and trauma. So the more that you are about the truth, the more you are able to compartmentalize those things. Not that you somehow just, shut that off. No, you'll have drama, you'll have trauma. I mean, come on. Who had more drama and trauma than the Prophet ﷺ?
Yeah.
I mean, his children died. I don't know about you, man. I would have a very hard time having the number of children that he had and then having them pass before my eyes. I don't know if I would be able to withstand that, right? May Allah give me and all of us the temperance to be able to do so. Yeah. But that's why he's the example.
I mean,
right? I mean, this is why he's the example. So I think, again, the truth just isn't something that is convenient or something that we write on a card or whatnot. The truth can also be a methodology of how to go through life.
Sure. I mean, I saw something on Facebook a couple of months ago. There's a brother who's well known on social media. He's a white convert, and he posted something that he does not recommend white people converting to Islam. And due to a lot of the social issues or whatever,
Was he kidding or?
He was serious.
Oh, serious.
He's dead serious. He's like,
So why is he a Muslim?
Because I know a lot of people do some like deadpan humor on Facebook. So.
No, he was dead serious.
So it was like a title bait, like a clickbait.
No, it wasn't clickbait. He like made this. He's been Muslim for like several years.
So what's the argument for why he's still a Muslim?
I mean, I feel like he's been in it so long, but he's like it's just not a religion for white people in America.
What?
In that sense.
Meaning, is he talking about culture? Like how?
I think culturally, how like again, like a lot of stuff that maybe Imam Marc talked about immigrant Muslims and things like that.
I think posts like those are like cries for attention or help. You know, sometimes people are going through stuff in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. I think somebody like that. And again, I haven't read it. I don't know the brother, so somebody excuse my just kind of ranting. Yeah. I would say that this is somebody who is having a hard time compartmentalizing the difficulty of being Muslim, right? I mean, this is and this goes back to this expectations, man. I mean, do I have an expectation to be able to walk into a masjid and not be questioned? Yes, but sometimes those expectations are not met. Maybe they won't even be met a lot of the time, and I understand it's difficult, but look. We read these things and think that they always apply to a situation other than the ones that we'll actually live out. So I'll give you an example. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he says what? There will come a time in which having faith will be akin to holding on to a burning coal. We always assume this is like The Walking Dead or something, right? It'll be hard to pray in Jama'ah because everybody will be a zombie and you'll have to pray alone, or, some other, some crazy nonsense. No, there may come a time where it will be difficult for a white person in America to become Muslim and hold on to their faith. I mean, sometimes that's how you have to read and interpret it. There may come a time in which being black and Muslim will be like holding on to a burning coal. Okay, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ didn't say, in these specific set of circumstances. So we have like some really misplaced assumptions and some set of promises we were thinking that we were given that just ain't true.
Sure.
I know that sounds like, tough love, but I mean, again, I don't know. Maybe I have just had some wacky experience, but I'll say in my defense, how is it that I've been able to not only stay Muslim, but remain an imam even after quitting my job, right? I quit my job. I didn't quit being imam. Hence here I am at Middle Ground right now recording this podcast with you. Mm-hmm. Because I understand that truth is the truth. And I realize that I don't have any promissory note from Allah or from the Prophet ﷺ how things will necessarily carry out. I know that they will be difficult, but I don't know how they will be difficult. So you kind of gotta train. I mean, why else are you like literally praying night and day and fasting and giving away your hard-earned cash to people that you don't know and all this other stuff? You're training for that one kidney shot that, it's like, look at Evander Holyfield, man. Dude is like in phenomenal shape, and some dude bites his ear off. That wasn't in the training regimen. Right?
Yeah.
And what do? You come back and you whip his behind, even though he like freaking bit your ear off. That's not in the training regimen. So convert, not convert. Like Muslims have to understand, man, you have to be prepared, inna jahannama kanat mirsada, right? Like hell is lying for you in ambush, and Shaitan and his troops are in the trench. Like we have to, at some point, this has to be about metaphysical truths.
Sure. The question that I've always been interested in deal with, it doesn't always come up, but you obviously, majority of your family is non-Muslim, I would assume, right? And
all my family,
and I was watching a YouTube video actually a couple days ago where somebody from Jeddah was in town, was interviewing Sheikh Hamza Yusuf like 10 years ago, and they were talking to his family, and his brother, and his sister, I think, are not Muslims. And the guy just asked, kind of put him on the spot, like, you're Sheikh Hamza's brother, what's holding you up? And he's like, well, I'm still like, there's still some issues I'm dealing with, etc. Obviously, I have a favorable vision of Islam. What's it like dealing? Because I've met some people who've been interested in Islam, but they were like, yeah, but my family won't be Muslim. Like, and that's their hang up. It's like, it's almost like they haven't conceptualized the conception of like, I don't know how real like paradise and Jahannam is for them, where you're like, I'd rather be with my family, and that's the thing, that's the hang up, even though they resonate with the theological aspects. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think, I think it's more of, it seems maybe exceptional for you because you come from a background where maybe everybody in your family is Muslim. So for me, it's normative for everybody in my family not to be Muslim. It doesn't mean I don't make dua, especially now that my parents are reaching, that stage in their life where they're elderly. My father's almost 85, that I pray for their guidance so that they can go to Jannah and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, it's pretty normal that everybody in my family isn't Muslim because, the first 19 years of my life, it was normal to not be Muslim. I've always actually been like, and I've known this happen to a few people that come from a Muslim family and somebody actually apostates. I'm like, man, now what is that like? That's got to be insane. I have good relationships. Like my oldest brother just doesn't like religion. He doesn't have any issue necessarily with Islam per se. He just hates religion altogether. And we're not terribly, terribly close. My middle brother, we're cool. He's not Muslim, but he's a jazz musician. He knows lots of Muslims. He's just like an easygoing person. And I'm the baby of the family, so I have a great relationship with my parents. I talk to them every day. So, it's different. Like, so one of my best friends that took Shahada at the same time I did, his mom didn't take it well. She had a very strong Christian identity. Well, my parents were not, I would say, they were not church going by any means. So if they had, if anything, it was a very more passive kind of, religious identity. But his mom took it like deep, deep offense. And then she took it even further when he legally changed his name. So for the brother that made that statement, I wouldn't recommend white people. No, I would definitely recommend white people. I would recommend everybody become Muslim. But I definitely would recommend them not changing their name unless it fits into those few areas that the Prophet ﷺ, told people to change their name. I mean, 99% of the companions didn't change their name. So I would highly recommend people not changing their name.
I think that guy should change the post to being like, Islam is not compatible with liberalism.
I just checked something. Actually, he took his account down.
I would say Islam is compatible. I would say Islam is compatible with liberal thought just as much as it is compatible with conservative thought, but it's not compatible with liberalism or conservatism.
Correct.
Right? The ism means by hook or crook you must articulate it through this? No. But I mean, clearly there are elements of Islam that you could say are liberal and clearly elements that could be labeled conservative.
Absolutely.
So, Imam, here's the thing. I always say that. I'm like, listen, Muslims need to be in the middle. We can't pick either side. So I'm always like, you know what? In some areas we're conservative, and some areas we're liberal. I would agree, in my opinion, that a lot of what we look at in terms of moral issues in society, we're pretty much more on the conservative side than we are with the liberal side. And I think fiscally and maybe in terms of how we deal with the poor and things like that, we're more on the liberal side, right? But I think we're right in the middle. And I think Muslims always get caught up in this whole fiasco of being either Democrat or Republican or conservative or liberal. I think we've already got it mapped out for us within Islam if they just stick to it. We kind of take the best from both sides. What are your thoughts on that?
I think as I would agree with that to an extent that, I think that's how we should be. Although I do believe that there is a great shift going on within the Muslim community that is starting to lean much heavily towards the liberal end of things.
Yeah, we got to stop that.
I think, and part of that is due to, some of it is due to societal pressure. Some of that is just lacking a backbone because people don't want to actually have to explain why they think, for instance, homosexuality is an abomination, and they're really concerned at what their friends will think, that the idea of a man putting his penis inside of another man is
we'll never accept
nightmare,
that. Yep.
Right? I mean, and because that's what it's about, right? Just as an example, homosexuality. I was having this conversation with a person the other day, how can you really believe that in 2017 that homosexuality is impermissible in Islam. And I said, well, I don't know what you really mean by homosexuality, but if you mean the act of a man sticking his penis in another man's anus until he ejaculates, yeah, that I still find an abomination.
Yeah, I was telling people, in Islam, we don't look at homosexual and lesbian. We call them sodomites. That's what it is, right? Let's be clear about the term. They're sodomites, right? People who engage in that behavior, and sodomy is not allowed in Islam. We'll never accept it.
Having behavior, having desires, right? So like having same-sex attraction, this is not something that was, this is not like some Alex Jones thing where now the frogs are gay. This is something that's been around for a long time, having same-sex attraction, right?
Right.
It goes back to what I said, I think, in the beginning of the conversation, is that, Islam asks you to move beyond what your initial format is and asks you to realign it with this divine template. So maybe you do have same-sex attraction, but it asks you to reformat yourself in a certain sense, right? To where you will be, in terms of acts or deeds, you will be compliant with what's pleasing to God. And there's just somewhere maybe you have to struggle, right? I love women a lot, and I have had to reformat and compartmentalize my desire for women. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily gone away anymore. It's just, it's something I gotta, put in check, because that's part of being in this club. Part of the membership is I gotta, it's like,
it comes from your iman, though, right? It comes from your faith in your Creator. Your belief.
It comes from the truth. Right. Everything rolls downhill from the truth, right? If you don't believe La ilaha illallah, I think in a very profound sense, then the things that Allah is going to ask you to do, at some point, you're going to start asking God to show His work, right? You're like, how did you carry the one in this equation? Show me, God. How did you, you start having this kind of thing of, and Allah doesn't show His work. Allah just says kun fayakun, right? Allah is not, when people say Allah is a mathematician, right? God is the great mathematician of the universe. Well, mathematicians have to show their work. Allah doesn't show His work. It's just kun fayakun. That's it. Like, if you don't have a deep internal belief in the truth and a respect for it, then inevitably you're going to try to have a conversation with God as if you're peers. And that's just going to lead you down a path of misguidance.
Sure. All right. Well, Imam Marc, appreciate you coming on. We're going to wrap this up. How can people find out more about you? And
I'm not sure they'll want to by now, but
our listeners probably they will.
No, our listeners will.
I actually want a part 2 about when we could talk about like conservatives and liberalism in Islam. I think that'd be a great subject matter. I think we'll get you back on though, talk about that.
Inshallah. I'm on Twitter, Manrilla. I'm on Twitter. I have my own website, marcmanley.com. I don't post as much as I used to there. I'm on Instagram, so if you want to see like a middle-aged, imam trying to squat, by all means, go on there and entertain yourself. So through the various social media channels is, where you can find me. Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Well, appreciate you coming on again. Jazakallah khair. For our listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and follow us on Instagram, and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. For our special guest, Imam Marc Manley, and for my co-hosts, Mort and Sim, this is Mahin signing off for the Mad Mamluks. Assalamu alaikum.